Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Brighton and Kempton and the honourable member for Dover for bringing this very important debate. It is definitely one of the biggest issues in my constituency for Putney, for Southfields and for Roehampton. And I'd like to thank the London Renters Union, Generation Rent and Shelter for the campaigning work that they have done to raise concerns that are very common across my constituency, and also with their work in supporting renters as well. And I'd like to commend Wandsworth Council on their 1,000 homes scheme, which are all going to be council housing. And that is the right way forward because, as so many members have pointed out, there is a housing crisis across our country that needs to be addressed and can only be done so with more homes. But I speak today on behalf of the 41,000 renters in Wandsworth, and especially those who feel that they're stuck in a rental system that's overheating, that's burning through their finances and having an emotional and mental health toll on their lives because of this imbalance of power. So we do look to this legislation, to the White Paper, to address that imbalance of power between landlords and renters. Renters who are spending so much money and yet still have an insecure whole system. There is much in this White Paper that is welcome, Mr Deputy Speaker. But I am beginning to lose faith in whether any of it will be delivered. So I hope to hear warm and encouraging remarks from the Minister today, but also pledges for action. The long-awaited Renters Reform Bill has still not been brought to the House. So can I ask the Minister where it is and when we will be seeing it? The Government promised renters reforms in the 2021 Queen's speech, but has yet failed to deliver. The private rented sector didn't even get a mention in the most recent Queen's speech. And yet there are stories that have been told today, and many that I know of, that really highlight the need for change. One is that I was evicted from my rented home. It was 20 years ago. The landlord told the three of us that we would have to leave because the landlord would be selling the house. We had a visitor from someone who claimed to be a solicitor, and I'm still not sure whether it was, who made sure that we paid our rent right up to the end, and rather than waiting for the last month to be our deposit, so we did that quite properly. But then the landlord made some spurious reasons for not paying back our deposit, took all of our deposits. We had by then gone on to move to different places. We couldn't afford to go to the small claims court. It was all too difficult. And we went back to the property only to find out that it had been re-rented to another group, and so went the landlord. And it was just so unfair, and that stayed with me ever since. The other day I was going to visit an area of my constituency, and on the way to see my constituent, I went past a house where the family were moving out, and they were absolutely furious. They had, it was a nurse and a policeman, and they had been given Section 21 notice to leave because they had been complaining about the mould in their flat. So it was a revenge eviction, or an eviction, as I hear so often, because of complaints to the landlord, asked to leave. They could not afford to move to any other property in the area, and were going to move to north of London and have to come back every day to their local jobs in southwest London. It was absolutely overturning their lives and seemed so unfair to them. I've also heard from someone who described herself locally as a beginner teacher. She said she moved into a flat that seemed to be absolutely fine, but very soon after moving in, she knew that there was damp and spreading black mould in the bedroom, which impacted her health. The landlord didn't acknowledge the complaints for a long time, didn't make any action to get rid of the mould, and then after 10 months served a Section 21 notice, and she had to leave. And no doubt the next tenant then moved on, found the same thing, and the whole cycle continued, leaving the landlord able to continue leaving that black mould and the health and safety concerns there. I've also heard from many survivors of domestic abuse for whom the private rented sector, being in the way it is having a huge impact. This fear of abuse versus fear of homelessness is really ensuring that many women who should be moving out for their own safety are not. Women's Aid have reported that the high costs of the private rental sector create a barrier for many women leaving their abusive partners. The Conservatives pledged to ban Section 21 evictions in 2019, and I've raised this several times in the House since being elected, but they still have not been banned. The latest Prime Minister has yet to confirm whether it is his policy to do so, so I do hope to hear from the Minister that the legislation will end no-fault and revenge evictions. Since the government first promised to end Section 21 evictions in 2019, around 230,000 private renters have been served notice. As has been mentioned before in this debate, that is an eviction every 7 minutes. So bringing forward this legislation is very urgent for so many people. Renters need the government to legislate now to provide them with immediate protection. There have been lots of nice words and aspiration, but no delivery. And this is perhaps not surprising, as there have been 5 housing secretaries, or is it 6, since I have become an MP. Too many people are stuck in a system with no power to challenge rogue landlords, no savings to get on the housing ladder, and housing that falls well below acceptable standards. Renters need a deal that gives them the security and dignity that they deserve. Yet this system is getting more and more acute. Everyone's been vying for giving amount of costs of the private rented sector in their own constituency. I think I can beat all the other previous honourable members. In Putney, the average rent for a 2-bedroom flat per month is £3,900. That's nearly £47,000 per year. One bed is about £2,700. It's astronomical. Currently a rented property will go onto the market first thing in the morning. By 11 o'clock there will be the many visits. By 1 or 2 o'clock there will be the offers being put in, and these then have to ratchet up through the afternoon. I've heard of landlords asking for 3 years rent up front, and also increasing monthly costs, and prospective renters having to outdo themselves in terms of what they can offer to a landlord when they're not entirely sure what will make a difference in the sector. And I know many people who are having to move out, move to different places, having to entirely change their lives, and also having to know, as I think I do, that my children will not be afford to rent in the area that I am living. So this insecure sector is having a huge impact also in the social housing sector, where many people are living in increasingly overcrowded homes as they have more and more children. But the fear of moving into the private renter sector is too great, meaning that they live in overcrowded homes for far longer than they would do otherwise. So it's not just about the private rented sector that we need this reform. 4 in 10 under 30s are now spending more than 30% of their pay on rent, according to the data, which is a 5-year high. This is absolutely shocking. And I know the Minister will know exactly this situation, especially in London. Demand for homes to rent privately has exploded post-pandemic. In London, the ratio of prospective tenants to rooms available is 7 to 1. The private rented sector also has the highest prevalence of Category 1 hazards, which are those which present the risk of serious harm or death. In fact, poor housing costs the NHS £1.4 billion a year, and society as a whole £18.5 billion. There are over 500,000 more households with dependent children in the private rented sector than in 2005, excuse me, making up 30% of the sector. And eviction from private tenancy is the second leading cause of homelessness in England. All of this is happening at a time of the context of the unprecedented cost of living crisis, and I'm so worried for what this will mean for my constituents in Putney through the winter ahead. Returning to the White Paper, as I say, much of this is welcome and will make a huge difference. However, it makes no promises on in-tenancy rent increases. It lacks detail on the Decent Homes standard, making no mention of the previously promised lifetime deposit. And there's lack of legislation to help renters afford legal advice when using the new PRS Housing Ombudsman. And also, I welcome earlier comments by other members about students. And I would like to ask the Minister if she will be meeting with Universities UK to look at ways in which we can make the student rented sector far more secure. I have an interest in this, Mr Deputy Speaker, as I have 2 students currently and have had 3. So I've spent a lot of my own money on the student private renter sector, but I know that lots of students' unions have running campaigns to say you don't have to rush into getting your tenancy very early on in the academic year and therefore signing up to maybe conditions which are much higher than can be afforded, and also paying huge amounts of money during the summer, for example. So a way in which universities could take on a larger amount of the private rented sector and make sure that it's stable and fair for students would be very, very welcome and revolutionary. There is lots of work to do. As a minimum, legislation needs to include increased security of tenure, including longer notice periods, a longer protected period from no-fault eviction, and an assurance that tenants are compensated when forced to move. Second, increased protection from abuse. In particular, landlords must provide unequivocal evidence when selling or moving back in. There needs to be a longer no-relet period and increased resources for local authorities to investigate abuse. And finally, there does need to be a focus on affordability, a limit on unaffordable rent increases, a rent tribunal system that's easier to access, in fact, easy to access, and an end to automatic eviction for arrears. Most of all, we need clarity from the new Prime Minister on whether he is going to honour the 2019 manifesto pledge to end Section 21 evictions. To summarise, Mr Deputy Speaker, renters in my constituency and up and down the country deserve safe, secure and affordable homes, and it's time for the government to put its money where its mouth is and deliver for them.